try. Yes. It says YouTube is not restoring enough video to maintain smooth streaming. We might have to let me try mine. Yeah. We were trying to use this, but
that's okay.
It says I'm just not sure. Maybe the quality below, because it says like video output is low. Not really sure if that has anything to do with the computer or.
How are you? Good?
Or maybe because we didn't. Because it has started, but I just see like bad video settings. I'm not sure why.
Assalamualaikum.
I think you are already.
It's too long.
Can you look at this? Okay, yes, we are live now.
Also? Inshallah. Did you finish?
Yeah, you can start.
No.
Oh, yes. Alhamdulillah.
Oh, really? So when are you guys going to try this weekend?
No, next week, like, this coming Friday. Not this Friday, it's
The following
Friday.
Friday. Inshallah.
So if you have something, let me
Good. Inshallah. There's one other family.
know. Is it the one that...
Eric and Badria, yes. Sabris?
No, I remember last time you asked me to give something to...
Uh-huh.
Oops.
Oh, to Brother Jabbar.
Yeah, so this is
Yeah.
different?
Yeah. No, there's another family here
Okay.
that wants to send something to Sheikh Hussein also.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And I'll probably send something to Brother Jabbar also.
Okay.
Inshallah.
I think our connection today is not
Is
that
bad?
good.
Okay.
I will probably just record
Okay.
and stream at the same time.
Inshallah. We go ahead and start?
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll go ahead and start, okay? Inshallah. We've got about 40 minutes. Inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So today we were going to touch on 3 separate topics, but I think we'll do well if we can get through 2 of them. We'll begin with zakat, and then we'll attempt to do Saum, fasting, and we'll leave Hajj maybe for the next session, inshallah. So let's begin with zakat. And there's 2 underlying premises, 2 important principles, I think, that are literally the foundation of the concept of zakat. The first is that all members of society have a moral responsibility to provide for those who are less fortunate. The onus of responsibility is upon the Muslim society or the members of the Muslim community within a society to help provide for those who are less fortunate. Number 2, that the only means to purify one's wealth is to pay out the purifying alms, which is the zakat, to those who are the rightful recipients of it. So zakat is a purifying element, if you will, of one's wealth. Now, we should understand that not all members of society are expected to pay zakat. Zakat is unique to a certain segment of society who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given a certain capacity. Only those whose wealth is greater than the liability minimum, or the minimum liability, and we'll talk about that. The liability minimum was set by our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam over 1400 years ago. And it's an amount of wealth and assets equal in value to 85 grams of pure gold or 595 grams of silver. And for those of you who follow the value of gold or silver, there's some fluctuation in that. I personally don't follow it. I rely upon our fiqh council and those people here in North America to notify us of what that value is. But an important note to keep in mind is that an individual must have met the liability minimum for 1 full lunar year. So if you just happen to have that a kind of wealth amassed for a few days out of the lunar year, you really have not met the liability minimum requirements, okay? You're supposed to have amassed and had that kind of wealth for an entire year. In simple terms, if you will, it's 2.5% on the amount of accumulated wealth that goes unused for a full year, Okay? So again, this is wealth, and this wealth can be in the form of cash, it can be in the form of savings, it can be in the form of gold and silver or assets that are set aside, but it has to be wealth that is not used for the full year. Not money that's in and out of your checking account, or money in and out of your savings account, or money in and out of your hands. Okay? Make sense? Inshallah ta'ala. Let's talk about eligible recipients, and it's listed, there's a group of 8 that are listed on page 75. Those individuals who are entitled to receive zakat. And we'll just kind of quickly go through them. Number 1 are those people who are indigent, okay? Number 2 are people who are poor. There's a difference in the two. Number 3, those who are struggling for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that can be people who are Islamic workers, who are engaged always in the process of spreading this religion or sharing with people this religion, or it can be people who are actually involved in physical struggle somewhere in the world, okay? And we know for a fact that that's always ongoing somewhere in the world. Number 4 are slaves. Now, we know that slavery has been outlawed in much of the world. We know that the stance of Islam vis-a-vis slavery, but the reality of the situation is there are people who still are in slavery in different places throughout the world, so those people would be entitled to zakat. Number 5 are the administrators and the employees needed to collect and distribute the wealth that's collected, or the zakat that's collected. Number 6 are debtors, those people who are in debt and who don't have the capacity individually to get out of that debt. They're entitled to that zakat. Number 7 are those people whose hearts are to be won over. Those may be individuals who are inclined towards Islam, who may need support from the Muslim community. They're entitled to zakat. And then the last group of people would be those individuals who are traveling and who are stranded for whatever reason. And invariably, we have people like that throughout the world, and certainly throughout North America. So that's kind of an overview of zakat. Again, for a deeper understanding of it and a more precise expression of individual things that we've referenced, there's a wealth of written material out there. There's a wealth of information online. And also, obviously, there are people in the community who would be happy to respond to particular questions relative to it. Let's turn our attention to fasting, and specifically fasting during the month of Ramadan. Ramadan is one month in the lunar calendar. Can anyone tell me which month it is? Is it the 1st, the 10th, the 12th, the 9th month of the lunar calendar? Exactly. And lunar months vary in length in terms of how many days. It can be 29 or 30 days, right? Depending upon the sighting of the moon. So there are a couple of methods. There's a methodology to identifying the start of Ramadan. And so there are a number of legally valid ways to mark the start of Ramadan. And I think he makes note of the fact, and we should mention that tonight, that these differences should not lead to disputes or divisions amongst the Ummah. That there are several different legal ways of beginning the month of Ramadan, and invariably, whether or not it's here in North America or whether it's other places in the world, you're going to have people who start on one day, and you'll have people that start on another day, and you may even have a group of people that start on a third day. And my response is always Allahu Alam, okay? That we make, Allah knows and we don't know. We make our best effort, but again, these different start dates and subsequently different ending dates, we may also end on separate days. It should be nothing that should divide and subdivide the Muslim Ummah. You do what you feel you're comfortable with, what your community is comfortable with, what your family is comfortable with. And if other people are doing something different, it should not be a topic for dissension, inshallah. Okay? Yes, Sister Zainab? Yes. Mm. Mm. Now you're talking about Hajj now, not Ramadan. Yes. Yes. Yeah. 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 Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Why we don't like? I know we don't have to talk about big difference between countries and
Yes.
between some so and that or different.
Mm.
He don't have. He doesn't have to tell others to make this is statement.
Mhm.
But why we don't follow one like if Islamic country like Saudi Arabia said. They
Mhm.
already saw
The crescent?
why we didn't,
It's an excellent question. I mean, and the question for the people who didn't hear Sister Zainab is very simply, why don't we follow one particular country or one particular agreed upon sighting? And the answer is really, I think, a simple answer, but it may be more complex than this. That the part of the challenge that we have today as Muslims throughout the world is the fact there is no single acknowledged leadership. There is no emir that everyone turns to in the world, including Saudi Arabia. Certainly, as you mentioned, during the Hajj, it's really a simple process, the day of Arafah. You know, it's easy, it's simple, it's sweet, it's clean. But the reality of the situation is that two things. That one, there is no single leadership in the Muslim world today that everyone looks to and accepts as the authoritarian voice and the definer of the start of Ramadan and so forth. Number two, the truth of the matter is that the jurists have come up with several ways that the beginning of the month can be acknowledged, okay? And we'll walk through this. And we can see that without that central leadership, that single leadership, then it leaves room, if you will, for the differences in terms of the start for the month of Ramadan. Let's kind of walk through it, and then I think we'll see it and we'll understand it. It's a great question. To be honest with you, Sister Zainab, I think there are a lot of hearts in the Muslim world that long for that long for a situation where the Muslims are doing those kinds of things in unison with one another. And make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala touches the hearts of the ummah, okay? And we move back to that point where there's an acknowledged leader and an acknowledged definition, inshallah. Allah guide us, inshallah. So let's talk about the different methods to identify the start of Ramadan. And one of the things, obviously, the issue revolves around historically the sighting of the new moon. More recently, there's been some scientific methodologies that are being used now. But classical Muslim scholarship states that the crescent must be actually sighted with the human eye by two Muslims on the eve of the potential first day of Ramadan. Okay? So, what's the month before Ramadan called? Huh? Shaban. Okay? So, that would be the night after the 29th day of Shaban. Yes? Which is the 8th month. So, on that night, there are people looking for the sighting of the moon. If it is sighted, which would happen at the time of the sunset, that night and the next day are considered the first of Ramadan. Yes? So if we go out on the 29th of Shaban, the moon is sighted, that night and the next day is considered to be the first of Ramadan. So we would pray Taraweeh, yes, beginning that evening. Okay? And the next day would be the first. Yes, inshallah. If nothing is cited, the previous month, Shaban, is extended for an additional day, right? So it continues to the maximum of 30 days, and the day after would be the first day of Ramadan. Make sense? No citing. We continue the month of Shaban, and the next day will be the first day of Ramadan. Some Muslims now consider that scientific calculation to be a legitimate replacement for the actual sighting. Now, if we read prophetic tradition, if we read the Hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says that you begin the month of Ramadan when the moon is sighted. Two morally conscious, good Muslims have to do the sighting. So oftentimes, we'll hear of sightings, but those sightings will be dismissed in parts of the world because the two individuals are not responsible Muslims. So they'll dismiss the sighting. Okay? We'll talk a little bit more. So, some Muslims now consider scientific calculations to be a legitimate replacement for actual sightings. And now, even within that group, there's two different groups. One, those who begin based upon the birth of the invisible new moon. And number two, those who calculate when the moon would theoretically be visible to the human eye, regardless of whether or not it was actually sighted. So this is the two groups. This is that scientific group split up into two groups. Okay? Two legally valid sighting methods according to classical Muslim jurists. One is a global sighting, and number two is a regional sighting. The global sighting kind of speaks for itself. That a valid sighting anywhere in the world, it could be anywhere in the world, but the Muslims that see the new crescent are acceptable people within the community. That global sighting anywhere in the world would allow the beginning of Ramadan anywhere in the world. So, the moon is sighted in Khartoum, Sudan, and it's acknowledged by the Muslim community there. If we were here in Detroit, we could begin our Ramadan with that sighting. If it was sighted in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and we were told that there's been a legitimate sighting, we could begin our Ramadan here. That's global sighting. Everybody good? The regional sighting, and regional, usually when they talk in terms of region, they're thinking in terms of continents. Okay? That actually what happens is, and I know people here in North America who will only begin their Ramadan with an actual visible sighting here in North America. Okay? So even if there's a sighting somewhere in the Middle East, or somewhere in Africa, or somewhere in Asia, what you're going to have, Sister Zainab, is a population of people here in North America that will begin their Ramadan based upon their allegiance, whether it's spiritual, whether it's national, to the country that they've come from or the particular country where the sighting is. I know people who will accept a global sighting from Saudi, but they won't accept a global sighting from somewhere on the African continent. Okay? It's okay. All right? So, we've got global sightings, we've got regional sightings. Either one of the two, the Prophet ﷺ has made permissible. So what you may have, and again, I think the important thing is that we recognize, one, there is a legal difference of opinion from the Muslim, classical Muslim jurist. Global sighting, regional sighting. And number two, in a very practical sense, there are people who are following one or the other. Okay? So invariably, Ramadan that comes up next year in 2017, wherever you are, whether it's here in the city of Detroit, or whether it's somewhere else in North America, or somewhere else, those people are returning home to Kuala Lumpur, they will hear of people who are starting their fast there in Malaysia, and people who are not starting their fast in the country they were in, Detroit, until the following day. Okay? And again, that should not be something that separates our heart. It's something that separates us in terms of people beginning their fast, but it should not separate the ummah, inshallah. Okay? And I think that's the important thing that we take away from all of this. Okay? So, it is possible for the moon to be sighted in one region while being impossible to sight in another. And it's possible that the moon can be sighted somewhere in North America even. And it's impossible for us to sight it because of the cloud covering, for instance. So we're here in Detroit, no matter how hard we're looking for it, we have this industrial clouds hanging over us. We can't see it for the fog, okay, of the smokestacks. But somewhere in California they've seen it, or somewhere on the East Coast they've seen it, all right? So again, we accept and Allah knows and we don't know, all right? So different regions can legitimately start and conclude Ramadan on different days. Let's talk about the themes of Ramadan, because really the issue is what's going on individually and collectively in terms of our practice of Ramadan and the ultimate intent of that fasting, which is the purification of self. Yes? Inshallah. So there's some themes, some generally agreed upon themes, and you find these themes acting themselves out in the behavior of Muslims during the month of Ramadan. The first is generosity. And I think everybody who's had a chance to participate or to observe Muslims during the month of Ramadan find that the Muslims are so much more generous during the month of Ramadan. And part of this is the prophetic tradition. It's written and said that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was generous of individuals, and that during the month of Ramadan, his generosity was even more magnified. He was generous as a rule, but during the month of Ramadan, that his practice of generosity grew exponentially. It became even greater. Okay? And what the Muslims should want to do, what we should strive to do, is we should follow that prophetic tradition. We should attempt to emulate him in our generosity, and oftentimes we find this in the Muslim community. In fact, for those of you who have spent time in communities where there's local masjids or jami masjids, you find that oftentimes during the month of Ramadan, the fundraising for whatever the activities are is very, very intense. Even from the first night, and certainly that first weekend where you have your largest group of attendees on Friday and Saturday evening, invariably in the big masjids, you will find every Friday and Saturday booked with some type of fundraising activity, whether it's the building of the masjid, whether it's for an orphanage, whether it's for an Islamic relief organization here in North America. There's a lot of generosity during the month of Ramadan. So, number two, along with this increase in generosity and charity, we find intensified levels of worship and devotional servitude. And again, this is for those of you who have had the wonderful opportunity to experience life during the month of Ramadan, that we see this intensified level of worship and devotional activity. Yes? During the month of Ramadan, we have an additional set of prayers, and we have one particular night during the last 10 nights of the month, Laylatul Qadr, that the Muslims are actively engaged in looking for. The third thing, the third theme, if you will, is studying, reciting, and reflecting upon the Quran. That the Muslims are very intent to read. We try to get through at least one complete cycle of reading the Quran during the month of Ramadan. But our studying and our reciting of it is intensified. And I think what we find is that really what happens is that in our desire to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Muslim Ummah becomes more lovable during the month of Ramadan. That you find the attitudes and the carriage of the Muslims to be much more palatable, much more likable, much more approachable, and much more lovable. In fact, one of my wishes and du'as during the month of Ramadan is, oh Allah, touch my heart, first and foremost, and make any increase in my effort of devotion and my taming of my nafs. One of the things that we're attempting to do is to tame the nafs during the month of Ramadan. Allow this to spill over in the other 11 months. And oh Allah, touch the hearts of the Muslims, that the discipline that we've learned, and I oftentimes say that Ramadan is like training camp for the Muslims, that we have 29, we have 30 days to discipline ourselves, and the hope is that this discipline spills over in the other 11 months. We're much more generous during the remaining time until the next Ramadan, that we're the people who are engaged in much more study and dhikr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that our consciousness increases and we sustain it throughout the remaining or the next 11 months until the next month of Ramadan. So studying, reciting, and reflecting upon the Quran. Let's talk about fasting. How to fast, okay? So the legal rulings of fasting have literally 3 elements, all right? And it's important that we know this. One is the preparation for the fast, and that's the conscious intention to fast the month of Ramadan. Yes? All right? That we have this conscious intention that for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we're going to fast the month of Ramadan. All right? And that, alhamdulillah, is sufficient. At the beginning of the month, it suffices for all of the days of the month, inshallah ta'ala, with some caveat, okay? And without conscious intention, the fasting is not valid. That we have to consciously make the intent to fast for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, some exceptions, or an exception. If our fast is interrupted for valid reasons, for legitimate excuses, renewal of conscious intention is required at the beginning of resuming the fast. Does it make sense? So, the month of Ramadan begins on Monday. We fast Monday and Tuesday, and for whatever reason, our fast legitimately is interrupted. At the point that we return to fasting, we have to make that conscious intention again. Okay? Inshallah. There is a pre-dawn meal that is not fard, okay, but it's highly recommended. Highly recommended is what? We talked about this category. Mustahab, yes? It is a prophetic tradition that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would take this pre-dawn meal. And this pre-dawn meal can be to your choosing. It can be Crisp Berry Crunch, it can be Captain Crunch, it can be Kellogg's Corn Flakes, it can be eggs and toast, it can be olives and cheese and bread, it can be unique to your background. But the sunnah is, and again, one of the things that we want to do as Muslims is we want to understand the sunnahs, and we want to establish those things to the extent humanly possible in our own lives. So the sunnah is this pre-dawn meal, and the pre-dawn meal is called what? Suhoor. Okay? Inshallah ta'ala. So we take this meal, inshallah ta'ala, for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this meal is to hold us until the breaking of our fast. So we eat some food, even if it is a small amount, and it's a challenge. I mean, at some point in the month of Ramadan, I think all of us who have fasted the month of Ramadan, finding ourselves having to force ourselves, especially when the days are long and the nights are short, to get up and take something for suhoor. I remember this past year when we had these real long, exaggerated days. By the time we finish up Taraweeh prayer, by the time that we prepared ourselves for bed, it's time for suhoor. And after a few days of fasting, it's amazing when you talk to people of other faith traditions who don't fast like we fast. How can you do that? Well, you tell them after a few days, really your desire to eat, it goes away. Yes, it's extraordinary. You think, it's diminished. Okay, that's the reality of the situation. Okay, and for a couple of reasons. One, your body has adjusted. We find out really how much we don't need. It's extraordinary. Okay, that's one thing. Number two, our focus is somewhere else. Okay, because now we've, the system has made the adjustment on the physical side, and we're making the adjustment on the spiritual side. Our focus is spiritual, and when your focus is spiritual, you find that it's not necessary for the system, the physical system, the physical plant to be fed like you fed it in the past. It can make it, okay? So alhamdulillah, this is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we try to eat some food, even if it is a small amount, before the time of the fast begins, okay? And the duration of the fast is how long? How long do we fast? Until Maghrib, right? Until the sun sets. And again, the prophetic tradition is, very simply, that quickly after the setting of the sun, we take that evening meal, okay? That it's better not to delay it. Now, if in fact one is famished to the extent, that again, we take it as quickly as we can. We want to break our fast, okay? And pray Maghrib. Yes? Inshallah. So that is the prophetic tradition. So the time of fasting begins before sunrise, before the time of Fajr prayer, and it ends at the time of Maghrib. And it is sunnah, again, it's the prophetic tradition, to break the fast with dates. 3 dates, if possible, and if not, just 1 date. If you don't have access to dates, then access to water. Islam is a very practical and simple way of life. The prophetic tradition is dates. If not dates, water. If not dates and water, then Pepsi Cola, orange juice, whatever it is that you have to for the pleasure of Allah. Sambusa, samosa, whatever the situation is. Islam is very practical. The issue is to break the fast as quickly as possible. Okay? Alhamdulillah. Fasting requires abstention. Now we're talking the physical act of fasting. There's abstention from drinking. We don't eat. We don't drink during the course of the day. There are no physical relationships between husband and wife. No sexual relationships, according to the legal rulings, okay? Anything that reaches the stomach invalidates the fast. Just a simple rule of thumb. Anything that reaches the stomach invalidates the fast. And again, for additional clarification, if you have a question, ask your local scholar, ask your imam, ask someone who has some knowledge, some good knowledge of Islam, whether or not this particular thing will invalidate the fast. So we've talked about the physical side of the fast. Let's talk about the spiritual side. Wow, our time is running away. In addition to the outer aspects, the fast has an inward spiritual dimension. Fasting is meant to subdue, to weaken the ego, the nafs, by depriving it of its nourishment, which is See that the nafs, the ego, has nourishment also. That nourishment is the fulfillment of its desires. Yes? The self says, I want this. We're disciplining it, okay? Weakening the ego is essential to the work of self-purification. The spiritual fast is the real point of the physical fast. That we want to bring the spiritual self in alignment with what's pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why do we fast? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has enjoined fasting upon us. We don't fast to lower the blood pressure. We don't fast to lose weight. We don't fast. This may be a byproduct. Alhamdulillah, this is the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jalla. That there may be multiple benefits to why we do what we do, but we do it because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has enjoined it on us, inshallah. So we try to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Internal dimensions of fasting has several elements to it. One, to abstain from looking at anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden. Now we're really conscious. I mean, this should be the MO, if you will. This should be what we do all of the time, but especially during the month of Ramadan, we're conscious of what our eyes are gazing at. And one of the reminders that we have as young men and young women, brothers and sisters, is to lower our gaze. Number two, we abstain from any kind of speech that would be displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, in addition to abstaining from speech ourselves, we also don't allow our ears to listen to talk and conversation that's displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's suggested that if we find ourselves in the company of people or in the environment where the speech is not pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, either we register our objection to it, changes, or we get up and remove ourselves from that environment. It's essentially important. And again, this is something that we practice during the month of Ramadan, but this is preparation for the rest of our life. That this should be the mindset of the Muslims all the time. Let's touch on a couple of other things and then we'll break for Salat al-Isha. So we're abstaining from speech, and that includes lying, slandering, backbiting, and we try to preoccupy our tongue with remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inner purity, kind of a reminder to ourselves, and nearness to